Welcome to Nichole Wilson. Nichole is a showmanship expert. This year, she judged showmanship at the Wisconsin State Fair. Uh, each year, she judges numerous county fairs across Iowa and Wisconsin. While she was a youth, she won showmanship 10 times at the Rock County Fair. That's every year except one during her 4-H career. In addition to that, she's also had a very decorated career at the Wisconsin State Fair. Those wins include overall intermediate showmanship at the Wisconsin State Fair in 2011, overall senior showman, and premier exhibitor in 2014. So, welcome, Nichole.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks. All right, so kicking this off, what is the purpose of showmanship?
Ooh, that's a really good question. To me, I think the purpose of showmanship is you're taking what's written in the standard of perfection and you're learning the knowledge that's within there to take this presentation and go into your barn and evaluate your animals and help you grow and develop your herd. And it's also beneficial when you're going out and buying a rabbit. You need to understand what that breed standard calls for. And if the rabbit you're looking for, it's going to help grow your program. So I think showmanship is the building block in raising rabbits.
What is it like getting to judge at the state fair?
I was so excited when I got the call. Just going back, I had been at the Wisconsin State Fair in far too long. And so being able to go back, it was very nostalgic and just remembering what it was like as a youth competing in those contests on Showmanship Day being the first day of the Wisconsin State Fair. There's always excitement around that. And then just like the nerves and excitement to go compete in showmanship. So getting to be the judge was a big honor for me, especially at the Wisconsin State Fair. That showmanship and those youth contests are so cutthroat. And it was really good preparation. Wisconsin State Convention is the beginning of September. And then right after that, you go into ARBA Convention. So it was a great prep to kind of get ready for those contests. And so being able to judge it to me was just a big honor and something that I would love to do again. And being able to see what the new youth are bringing forward and then their knowledge was really exciting for me.
Very, very cool. That it is interesting getting to go, having it be first full circle and having gotten to compete in youth and then getting to come back.
It was so weird because it was like, oh my gosh, or some of these kids, I'm like, I remember when they were little and they were like the juniors or they were, aspiring to be on the teams. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, and now I'm judging you in showmanship.
I completely understand.
Yeah.
All right. So how tough is the showmanship competition at the state fair?
It's tough. I remember going through judging it that day and there was a lot of things where I was like, wow, like I had to get nitpicky. I remember when I was a youth and it was always very nitpicky. And so being able to judge through it, and there was a lot of high scores that day. Absolutely. And we had some ties and I had to come up with a tiebreaker. And so, it comes down to like a point can get you from being first place in your age group. And then, even tighter point spread when you get into going over the premier exhibitor. So it's definitely cutthroat. Those kids know what they're doing. They've seen that showmanship form from the ARBA before, so they know what's on it. And so now it's just taking it to the next level of adding in, what do all those words mean and what do they look like when you go through your showmanship. So it gets pretty tough. It's very competitive.
What are you looking for while judging showmanship?
Yeah, so what I'm looking for is I always give comments to the whole crowd after I'm done and kind of review kind of my thought processes of the day. But really, when you're going through that sheet, I don't just want you to rattle malocclusion, the peg teeth, just rattle off the words. I want you to describe them. What is that going to look like if your rabbit has it? Because you really need to know if you're out in your barn and your rabbit has misaligned teeth. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, she has malocclusion. Is it wolf teeth? Is it budding teeth? I really want the description. I want to know that you understand the term that you're saying. And I also want you to give in the information on your breed standard. Tell me about it. And yes, I'm a wool person, so I'm very into tell me about the density, texture, and color, but that's important in every breed of rabbit. So
Right.
I really want to make sure that even if your rabbit's not a wooled rabbit or a breed that has a lot of points on the fur, that you're still looking at every single piece that is outlined in your rabbit standard of perfection and what's on the showmanship score sheet. And so I just want there to be a level of understanding that you're not just memorizing a script per se.
Completely makes sense. Completely makes
Yeah.
sense. So what do the best showmen do to stand out in the competition?
I think you can stand out as a showman. One, if you can give me a little bit more about your breed, tell me about some of the point breakdowns. Tell me something that's unique about your breed, whether it's marked, being able to describe all of those things that make your breed unique. But also, if you can share some information on outside breeds, if you can tell me about some specific DQs to your breed, or like one of my favorite things that I always included in showmanship was the breeds that are disqualified for having a dewlap. Just those little things that can be useful when you're going through the showmanship, instead of just saying my rabbit has a dewlap or my rabbit doesn't have a dewlap. If you can just put in those little pieces that show that you have some knowledge and understanding, or even some good terms out of that front half of the standards. I think there's a lot of good words in there that aren't always used. And so let's dive in on those. Let's talk about that. So those are the things for me. Showing that you studied the standard a little bit for me is always important.
Or what are the biggest mistakes you see while judging?
Yeah, they get to the tail, they have the rabbit flipped over, they check the tail, they put the rabbit on, they're like, I'm done. And internally, my jaw just hits the ground. I'm like, no, you just left the most points on the table by just stopping at the tail. It kills me every time. But I mean, there's so much. I mean, you haven't even judged the top half of your rabbit. You haven't looked at the wool yet. So that's the part where it just, I'm like, oh, you were so close. And that to me in some instances is the easiest, because you're going, the shoulders wide, well filled, ribs, well, it's just that part. I'm like, it's wide and well filled is your key words, and just the fur, being able to go over those judging comments. So that to me is the biggest mistake, leaving half of it on the table.
Well, and that's what you were saying too on the reason why, or the purpose of why we do showmanship, is that we're it's a building blocks for everything you do within the rabbit hobby. Is you're needing to evaluate the health of the animal, then also evaluating the quality and such. Those are, yeah. I fully agree with you. That part's critical. It's not just about, hey, is this rabbit free from diseases? Like it's about all of the actual the quality traits that the animal possesses.
Yeah, and I think another thing too that you can always kind of tell who's been practicing the most too is by how they go through showmanship. I always say showmanship is a cycle. So when there are those showmans that just bounce from the ears to the legs back to the top, it's not as fluid, and then it's very easy to forget things. So those are probably the two biggest mistakes. It's a cycle. Just start at one point and pick your circle and come back around.
And so when you're judging, I know that like some states do have different showmanships, but when you're judging like an event like this, you are just using the ARBA showmanship card.
Yep, we just use the ARBA showmanship card. When I judge county fairs, I ask if they have their own form. So like Rock County used to have its own form that we had for years, and then I got out, and my mom's been helping, and we've been using more of the ARBA form. So when I go to a county, I always ask, like, do you have your own form, or do you want me to bring one? And I always say that I'm going to use the ARBA one. And if they offer to print it off and have them there on hand, then I ask them to print that one off. I think it's the most universal and the best thing to use.
Yeah,
it really covers everything.
So do you end up giving back those forms typically at the end of your showmanship, or at the end of the contest, or do you just let youth talk to you? How do you give feedback to them?
Yeah, so I give feedback on the bottom of the section. I love writing notes. So I'll write, I think at the state fair, I wrote so many things. There was lines and points. The sheet was great comments and some feedback on it. So I try and write my thoughts. I'll kind of write like one or two words while they're going through, so I can like take in what they're saying. And then at the end, I'll continue on those thoughts and just kind of write some comments. And then I give that to their superintendent, and then they score it and give it back. And then at the end, when all the kids have done and the scoring is all completed, I'll go through and kind of pick out a few things that I noticed that were a trend within the showmanship presentations, and just say, hey, like, here's my feedback and some advice for you guys going forward. And then I always offer it up to questions at the end if people want to talk to me on a one-on-one. I try and make myself available for them too.
Yeah, that's really good. So the next three things I have is breaking down the steps more for posing, picking up, and examination. And I'm gonna kind of leave it up to you on like how you want to do it, but like we're interested in hearing, you know, what you're necessarily looking for while you're posing the rabbit. Like, what direction is the rabbit facing? Does it matter? What are you looking for? And you know, like, break down the steps that like you would want to see somebody do.
Yeah, so when it starts with posing, I think there are two good spots to do posing. You can either do it right away in the beginning. I did it in both. When you get to the table, you know, you introduce yourself and you introduce your rabbit, you know, with the breed, what variety it is, senior, junior, the age, and the sex. And so I think that's the prime example. You place your rabbit on the table and you pose it. I did it with a Jersey Woolly, so you'll notice I'll always have like a higher head. So, you know, I posed my Jersey Woolly right away at the beginning while I was going over those things. And then I would show the different angles. So I would start posing and say, my Jersey Woolly's posed, and this is how you pose your Jersey Woolly. And I would talk about where the front legs needed to be aligned as well as the back legs for the rabbit to be properly posed. I think that's the prime time to do it. And then I'd also do it at the end when I had just flipped over my rabbit to go over the body and judge the wool. So I would pose my rabbit again, and then I would look at it from the side. So I did the ARVA judging contest as a youth. And so I kind of would think about it as a judge. How are you looking at the rabbit? So, you know, you pose it, I look at it from the side. I may turn my rabbit around and look at the hind quarter, and just, you know, I'm looking at like the fullness in that hind quarter. And then I'd pose it and look at it at the front. You know, how does the head and the ear placement look to the body? And I think at one point I was posing on both sides of the rabbit, either the left profile and the right profile. But I think being able to see that 360 view of that animal, especially if you have a marked breed, I think you definitely need to look at both profiles so that way you can talk about those markings. But I definitely think a 360 view, and I'd even look down as I got older, like from the top, how does this rabbit look in width from the shoulders to the hindquarters while I'm also feeling it. So I think those are the best two spots to do it. And I think describing how your breed's supposed to be posed is important. And that's one thing that I never used to really talk about posing when I was talking to the kids afterwards, but I've noticed so many kids have seen, you know, some of them know what a good rabbit looks like. They have people on Facebook that post those really nice animals that have the nice commercial or compact body type, and their rabbit may not look like that. So they'll overpose it to make it look like something they've seen online. So I'm really stressing with them now, like, let's look at like, where are the front feet placed? Where are the hocks and the hip all lined up, instead of overposing or stretching them out. So that's been one thing that I've really been trying to push as I go to different showmanship contests.
Very good. Very good. So then when you're handling that rabbit, what kind of things would you say, or how would you do it properly first? Like picking it up and holding it. And then what are things that let's start with that. What would you ideally want somebody to do with picking up the rabbit?
Yeah. So when you're picking up your rabbit to leave, it's just as important walking in how you're holding the rabbit as it is when you leave. So I always learned you put the head under your armpit, and then you had, so I'm right-handed, so I had my left arm kind of supporting it underneath. I'll back this up so you can maybe see my hands. I'm a very hand talker. So I'd have the rabbit head under my arm. My left hand would kind of support the rabbit and have a hand on its hind quarter and be able, so the rabbit would be sitting on top, and then I have my right hand just kind of placing it on top so the rabbit felt secure. My biggest pet peeve is when people have their rabbits snuggled up and their head is right underneath their chin. It's cute, but it's not cute when something freaks your rabbit out and it claws your chest and neck. So I don't care how tame your rabbit is. I always want it to be head under your arm, have full control, and have your rabbit feel safe and comfortable. And just when you leave, you still need to carry it with that same poise. So I always pick up with my left hand underneath kind of the belly, and then we'll pick up from the wow, sorry, I'm trying to like visualize how I would pick this up. Yeah, I kind of like, I had a Jersey boy, so it's small. So I pick my left hand, it would kind of go under the stomach, and the right hand on its butt, and then I would be able to bring it forward, kind of draw it to you, put your hand back on time. And if you've got, a bigger rabbit, a lot of little kids love to have the biggest rabbit. And so, then I'm kind of like, okay, let's get your arm wrapped around your rabbit and then kind of leave that way. I think the biggest thing is just making sure you have control of that rabbit. If something spooks it, these contests a lot of time are in totally different settings than they're used to. And our showmanship day as a youth was always on the day the daycares came. So there's always a screaming kid there to, scare your rabbit. So, just really make sure you have control, and that it is something you have to practice. It sounds kind of silly practicing picking up your rabbit, but you got to make sure it's one, comfortable for you, and it's protective and the rabbit feels safe.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Worrying about the safety of the rabbit, I think, is critical, and that's why you were saying you're doing all those things. Is that's why you want to handle it properly, so that if something does freak it out, the animal doesn't get hurt, or you don't get hurt. So yeah,
absolutely.
I agree. Do you so like what if somebody were to like not pick up the rabbit the way you described and say they just drug it across the table? What would you say? What would you say as a judge, and what do you just think in general on it?
Oh wow. Yeah, I think when there's a scenario where there's just no control, and it's very obvious that it has been practice of how to pick up your rabbit, I'm very concerned. Thankfully, I haven't really been in that situation. More so, I just do with kids putting the rabbit's head and kind of like holding it in front of them. But I dock off points, and I get kind of hard on it just because it is so important. It's not, when you forget to say one word, okay, that's like a point. But when you are really putting, risk in how you're handling your rabbit, then yeah, I'm pretty harsh on it. I'll make a comment, and I may say something to the superintendent depending on the situation. But thankfully for me, I really haven't had any scenario where I was very concerned about how the rabbit was getting handled.
When a kid flips over their rabbit,
yeah.
What if the kid scruffs the animal? Like, can if the kid scruffs the animal, what do you think as a judge, or like what do you think as a judge?
Yeah, it happens a lot, and especially I feel like people have big rabbits. They're scruffing them. There's a little bit more skin to grab, and I usually will pause, especially when I can tell the rabbit is. Usually when you're scruffing it, you're not getting a good control when you have them flipped over anyways. So I'll pause, and I'll just say, hey, like, why don't we try flipping your rabbit over this way? And I'll come around the table and be like, this is how I flip over my rabbits, and just kind of show them and help them do that. And I'm like, this is going to make your life a lot easier. So I step in just because it's a habit of mine that I don't want it to continue on. I just kind of want to nip it in the butt. Let's learn how to properly do it. And I really most kids are appreciative because you can tell they're kind of surprised, like, wow, my rabbit is not like flipping, trying to get away every 5 seconds, and I could actually talk about things. So I usually just step in.
And why do we not want them to scruff the animal?
Yeah, you don't want them to scruff the animal. 1, you don't have good control over the head, and 2, it's damaging to the rabbit. It doesn't matter if you have a big rabbit or a small rabbit, but when you grab it just by the scruff, you're pulling its weight essentially with its skin, in my understanding of it. So you're not doing your rabbit a favor. You're not doing you a favor. You really need to have, grab by the ears and pinch kind of the shoulders is how I do it. And then you're scooping it with its hindquarters. So the rabbit feels fully supported. You have a hand for your rabbit to rest on. You have a hand to look at things. And when you go to shows and you see the judges, they're not scruffing the animals either. You want to be respectful of the rabbit and of other breeders if you are to become a judge from showmanship. So it's just not a good practice at all. And definitely, I always say, kids, if you're so nervous about flipping over your rabbit, practice with a stuffed animal, get the hand motions and the placement correct. Granted, it's lighter than your rabbit, but if you have a smaller rabbit and a bigger rabbit and you feel more comfortable with the smaller rabbit, pick that breed instead of the big breed. You're not going to impress me if you can flip over a big rabbit or not. It's how you flip it over and how you can handle and secure your animal.
I like that a lot. That's a great point. And I like the stuffed animal trick. That's a good idea.
Yeah, my mom when I was a kid always had me practice the stuffed animal, and then as I got older, not just a little toddler anymore, then you practice it, especially in the summer. Kids want to practice flipping their rabbit over like the day before the fair, or in the hottest time of the year. So it's like in the morning, let's practice. Not morning, night, whenever it's cool.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing. When I was practicing showmanship a lot, was I would end up doing it with a stuffed animal, and it's just it's convenient. It's there. You're still hitting all the steps, because initially learning the routine I think is difficult until
absolutely. And your rabbit, doesn't matter how good you are, showmanship does not want to be flipped over on its back for 20 plus minutes while you try and remember what comes next. So I think it's good to do with a stuffed animal.
Makes sense. Okay, so breaking down the examination, talk about what you're looking for, from a judging perspective, is kind of what I'm thinking for breaking down the stuff examination. Is kind of what I'm thinking for breaking down the stuff examination.
Yeah. So I always start with the ears. I always have started with the ears, and then I just work my way in a circle. So I think when you're looking at all these different parts, you're kind of it becomes a cycle as you get to know it. And it becomes memorized. Like my mom's had me come back and do showmanship, and I haven't done showmanship in a while. And it's just amazing how once you have it cemented in your brain, you can just recall it. So start with your ears. Then I move to the head. I think one of my big pet peeves is how some showmen have looked at the head and the parts on the head. So I always look at the eyes, and I always think you want to have good lighting. Granted, where you're doing showmanship may not have good lighting, but you want to look at both eyes. And this does not mean that you need to poke or open your rabbit's eyes. We can just naturally look. I would always hold mine up in the light and just kind of get a good look on both eyes, and that way I could see into both things. Again, with the nose, I think the best way to look at the nose is when your rabbit is flipped over. If your rabbit's sitting on the table and you're looking at it, you can't see deep into its nose. And so I think it's best to look at it when it's flipped over, because you also have to check the insides of its paws, and it's best to do when it's all right there and the rabbit is flipped over. On the teeth, I'm good with a quick show me that you know how to look at the teeth, and then just let go of the mouth. You don't need to sit there holding your rabbit's mouth open while you talk about malocclusion and what their teeth should look like. Let's be quick about it. The legs, that's another thing, that checking the front and back legs. I get really, if someone's doing it in a way that I don't feel comfortable with, I'll kind of pause it. I'm always very gentle. We don't need to pull. We don't need to move our rabbit's legs all over. Just a gentle feeling of the legs. And then when you kind of look at the rabbit and it's relaxed, flipped over, you can see how its leg placement is. If it's broken, you're going to be able to see the angle within that leg, or if it's pinched, it'll relax and you can see where its legs, if they're parallel or if they're bowed inward or outward or pinched. So I always say, just be gentle. You don't want to hurt your rabbit doing showmanship. The tail, I had Jersey Woolly again, so I always checked it when it was on its back, because sometimes it's hard to find when it's sitting back up. But I would say, and some kids have a lot to say on the belly or the chest, or talk about pigeon breasts or checking for things for the feet and legs. Once they've shown some of it, I am totally good if they flip the rabbit back over, talk about it, finish their spiel, and then flip the rabbit back over to go to the next part, especially if the rabbit is not having it, not wanting to participate. Just give your rabbit a break. Or if you're nervous and you can't remember what's next, your rabbit being flipped over for a long time, for me is something I talked a lot too in mine. So I would talk about things, flip them back over, just give them a little break. They're not used to sitting on their back for that long all the time. And then just when you flip them back over, make sure you pose your rabbit and you're really feeling your rabbit's body with a firm hand. Don't give a soft hand. Every time I think of how I watch judges feel a rabbit's body, and they have, a good grip and they're really feeling your rabbit. And so I always think you make sure you have a firm hand while you feel the body, and then checking the fur, stroke it from the head or from the hind quarter to the head. Doesn't matter if you have wool or a rollback or flyback coat. That is how you're stroking it. Or if you have a Rex, if you're patting the fur, really think about that. Those would be my things on the examination.
All right. So one of the parts of showmanship is asking the participants questions.
Yeah. So I always ask at least 3 questions, and I try and make them all about different topics. I try and think about questions that I've been asked in showmanship, or Arbor Royalty always had some really good questions out of the standards. So I always try and do one of the definitions. At the state fair, I had every kid pick a letter of the alphabet, and then I got to pick the word within that. And if they picked a letter and I didn't like the words, if they were too easy, I'd make them pick a different one. So I think that's good. You got to understand these different terms. Lately, one of my favorite showmanship questions is to define the word chuffy. I think it's just it's a fun word, to be honest. And my mom had actually found it in the standard and called me one day. And she's like, "Do you know what this word is?" And I was like, "No, I don't." It's the, quote me if it's like if they have a roll of fat around their shoulder region. And mom was, "I think we got a rabbit with chuffy," and we did. It was kind of funny. So that's one of my favorite words. It's so random. It catches most people off guard. I know it caught me off guard when she asked me. So I ask that a lot, honestly. I probably won't now once this comes out, because everyone's going to know what chuffy means. And then I also try and ask breed specific questions, breed specific or something about, and then the third question is about some other breed, whether it be a different body type, a marked breed. So that way it's kind of a full knowledge, something about your specific breed, and then something about a more broad rabbit terms. So I try and just change it up. And especially when I was at the state fair, I knew that I wanted to keep questions fresh. So I would try and come up with a whole bunch of different questions. I prepped some before I went. That way I could just kind of pull them out real quick.
If somebody didn't cover that, judging terminology or the, evaluating their rabbit, I end up trying to ask that during the exam, and just trying to be hey, do you know? And
absolutely.
I like asking.
That's a really good point, especially when I notice if a kid missed something totally entirely. I'll try and ask them as kind of, did you just miss it, or are we aren't comfortable, with the knowledge around that? But yeah, some, especially younger kids, I'll try and ask tell me the strength and weakness about your rabbit, or I'll try and ask if you're going to go grow your herd, what would you want to complement this rabbit with? Are you going to look for better shoulder or a fuller hind quarter? So I think asking a strength and a weakness of your rabbit, but the side, don't just tell me it's cute. I know it's cute.
Yeah. All right. So as a judge, this is two separate questions. What are you looking for in terms of eye contact from the exhibitor, throughout the process while they're up there? If you have multiple participants up there at the same time, what do you want to see somebody do in terms of eye contact?
Yeah. So every time I've judged showmanship and every time I've participated in showmanship, it's always been a one-on-one style. I know some fairs do kind of the jackpot style, like you would in normal livestock, where you have all the kids up there at once. So I've always done it one-on-one. When you're doing your showmanship presentation, look at your rabbit. I don't need to see what you're doing. I'm looking at your motions and what you're doing. So during the presentation, I'm fine with, you being focused on your rabbit. When you come up and you shake my hand, I don't know. Some people may not do that now because of COVID. I don't know, but I don't know. But if you go and you shake the hand, like look me in the eye, let's be a little professional about, firm handshake, look me in the eye. And then at the end, while we're talking, look me in the eye. I get a little concerned if they're kind of like looking off to the side, then it's like, okay, is there someone kind of guiding them? Thankfully I haven't had that, but I'm always kind of looking like, where are you looking? Are you looking at me, or are we distracted by something else going on?
It makes sense. This is a separate question, but what, like you talked about, like while judging at State Fair, that the point spread's very, very small.
Yeah.
What do you do to break a tie?
Yeah.
Or how do you end up deciding how you're going to place the top ones?
Yeah, so at the State Fair, when we broke a tie, I just went back to what we did when I was showing at the State Fair. And it was like rapid fire questions. And then once you got one wrong, you were done. And then the next person went to see how far they could go on the question. So I came up with a list of questions, and then I separated the individuals that were in the tie, and then just brought them up, asked them their questions, wrote down their answers, and then had the other one come and answer those same questions. And then two, I just made sure they were far away. So when I did it, I had the individual that was in the tie that wasn't getting asked those questions sitting on the other side of the barn. And then the superintendent waved them over when they were done, and they swapped. So I think that's the best way. I asked them the same questions. And I had written down on their sheet too, which questions I had asked them at the end of their showmanship. So I knew which questions they had already answered, so that way none of them were asked the same questions again.
Makes sense.
And for that, one of my favorite questions is to rattle off all the breeds that are disqualified for a dewlap. And I think it was on an ARBA test about breeds without dewlaps. And so I was like, I'm going to learn all the breeds that are disqualified for having a dewlap. And it's not as many as you would think. So I always think that's a good one.
All right, so these next couple, what is it? There's just a couple of questions left. So what advice would you give to youth practicing showmanship?
Yeah, so showmanship can definitely be something that's intimidating, especially in the beginning. I always say showmanship is like building a house. The first few years is really the hardest because you have to learn everything that's on that sheet. And so you're building the foundation for your showmanship for years to come. So in the beginning, you're learning the basics. As a novice into showmanship, I'm not expecting you to answer all of my crazy or really hard questions. I just want to understand that you know what you're doing, the different body types or the different body parts, and that you've kind of got a rhythm going down and you're starting to learn that base knowledge. And then as you go from a novice to, an intermediate into senior, I want you to add on to that house. I want you to add those little details and learn those breed specific things within your standard. So I always say at the beginning, it's tough, but you got to stick to it because it'll just get easier over time when you start to memorize it. Each year you're not memorizing the whole thing again. And with that, it involves practice. Like you have to practice a lot. You don't go to a test the day of and just study all before school starts that day. You start practicing and studying beforehand. So the same thing is true with showmanship. When I was growing up, I think we had the showmanship sheet everywhere. And my mom would just pull it out and she'd be like, we're doing showmanship today. Tell me, start, go. And she would mark off points. I'm like, well, you forgot this part, or this part was really good. And so in the beginning, you're learning that rhythm. So she would just call out and have me start doing showmanship. It's great. I'm like, everybody is driving to things. You're going to school or you're driving to a friend's house. My mom always had me practice on the way to grandma's house in the summer. So it's a perfect time. You're in the car like 10, 20 minutes, get a good practice round in. And then as I got older and as I've had older showmen do their showmanship under me, I will stop them in the middle and maybe ask them a question then. So my mom would always have me say, today in the car, you're going to tell me about the legs, or today, tell me about the tail or the teeth, and just pick random parts of the body. And I'd have to say that part of the showmanship. And so that way, I remember, so in Rock County, Teresa Christian would always judge. And as you got to be a senior, she would pause you and ask you a question in the middle. And I remember being younger thinking, wow, that's kind of intimidating, but also sounds kind of fun. And so I was practiced and prepared for that because I had learned how to just do individual body parts on their own. And so I think that's good too. And especially if you're struggling with a certain spot, to just really grow on that one area. And it's the same sheet essentially every year. There's just minor changes. And so print that sheet off. It's free. Use that and just keep practicing and stick with it. The beginning's the hardest, but it is something that you're going to use for as long as you're raising rabbits.
Yeah, and it's something like you said, it's something that you're still doing. Like if you're out purchasing stock, or if you're looking at juniors in your or your rabbits you're weaning in your barn, that's what you're still using to decide if you're keeping the rabbit and if it's one that needs to stay in the herd.
Absolutely.
All right. Along those same lines, what advice would you give to leaders teaching showmanship?
Yeah. I think the best part to teach showmanship is one, start with that scorecard and just review it, get a good understanding. Second part is when I was learning showmanship and as a rabbit project leader teaching showmanship, you didn't get to bring your rabbit to every meeting. You were practicing with just a stuffed animal. And so that way I think that's the best way to learn. You're not on a real animal, so your rabbit that stuffed animal can be on its back for however long it takes you to get it done. And that's the best way to get familiarized with holding the animal and flipping it over and doing those motions. And two, come up with creative ways to teach different illnesses or body parts. Kind of make a game out of it. There's a lot of resources today, even more than when I was in youth, that you can use to learn different body parts and learn different things about rabbits, that I think it makes it really easy and fun. And flashcards, when in doubt, flashcards always work. And so, put a word and to learn the definition on a flashcard and just flash them through the group. I think that always helps. In our 4-H club, we'll take more experienced members and pair them up with a new or younger member to showmanship. One, it helps create a good bond within your 4-H project and between your older and younger members. But two, sometimes a younger individual is going to learn better from another youth than from, a parent or a sibling. So I think that's some good advice, and just really push that kids just keep at it. And it gets hard, and I'm sure in the beginning, it's intimidating, but it's so rewarding that you just got to remind them that it's going to get easier.
How do you prepare to become a showmanship judge?
One, I think you yourself have to be familiar with the showmanship presentation and have a solid presentation within your own mind. I think that's step one. I think step two is getting familiar with the sheet you're going to use. That's why I always ask if they have their own, or if I get to bring my own or suggest which sheet to use. I think it's best when you're really familiar with that form, then you're not focused on where is the head, where is this on the score point. You can just keep checking the boxes and flow through. And also just take into consideration, where are you judging? When I judge for a county fair, my questions were a lot different than at the state fair. So where, what kind of questions do you plan on utilizing? And then I opened up my standard and just went through. I also have my old standard from when I was participating in contests that I had marked up and made notes of different things. So I kind of pull those out of questions and compare it to the newer standard, but just pull out questions and have those prepared. That way you guys can have a really smooth, fluid day. And then I think as you grow on, so when I started judging, especially in Iowa, I'm obviously not from Iowa, just got my foot in the door at county fairs through Zach Sauer. And so once you get that one opportunity, really make the most of it. And your experience with those kids can help you get so many more opportunities. And that's been the case for me. Just did a couple small county fairs, and now I get to do quite a few every summer. So I think just following those simple steps is the greatest way to become a showmanship judge, and keep practicing it too.
So along those same lines, what would you recommend to someone who has a dream to one day judge at the state fair?
So I think the best way to get into judging big events would be, like I said, make the most of it, but two, get some experience under your belt. I've been judging showmanship for about 5 years now, And I had all the experience behind me with youth contests and participating in those that kind of helped grow my name within the rabbit show community. And so I think, you don't have to have all these years of experience, but if you are very knowledgeable and people are aware that you are knowledgeable, and you have a good understanding of the standard of perfection and the showmanship period, I think that's the best way. And sometimes it just takes a few years of hard work and putting in the time and energy to show to people that you know what you're doing and that you can be a successful showmanship judge is the best way to kind of get your foot in the door.